Community. We arrived yesterday. We're having a wonderful time. And Leslyn wanted me to say she's my #1 fan. She's my #1 fan. So she's seated in that #1 seat over there. And I just like to kind of set the tone with a little flute piece. That's a little piece called Speak to Me. That's what I'll be doing. I'll be speaking. Thank you. We'll play a little at the end as well. Since Valentine's Day is so close at hand, I thought I would read to start out a poem related to a Valentine's Day poem. But first I wanted to tell you about the Tater family that moved into our community, the Tater family. And the father and husband of the family was Dick Tater. And his wife's name was Hezi Tater. And Dick usually got his way because Hezi hesitated, and he would usually call the shots. But they came into a community church because they wanted to get their children involved in a youth group. But two of their boys were stirring up trouble in that youth group. And their names were Aggie and Erie. Aggie and Erie Tater were creating problems in the youth group. And so they were thinking about expelling this family, but there was, and also Roe Tater, he couldn't make up his mind. Roe kept going different churches and different youth groups. Roe Tater wasn't around that much, but Aggie and Erie were harassing people in the group. But there was one redeeming grace that they had, that family, and it was one of their daughters, and she always brought out the best in people. She drew out the best. She saw the best. She believed the best about people. And her name was Facilitator. And when facilitator, when they saw her in action and how she won people's hearts in the youth group, they ignored Aggie and Erie. They just ignored their harassment, and they decided to focus on Facilla, because she knows how to bring it. And we all want the best to be brought out of ourselves, and we all want to bring the best out of others. And then the other one I wanted to tell you about was a man in a supermarket. And he had a baby in the push cart going down the aisles of the supermarket. And the baby was crying hysterically, screaming hysterically. And a poor man going down the aisle, he's just saying, "It's okay, Georgie, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, Georgie. You'll see, it'll be okay. You'll be all right. Just calm down, Georgie." And there was a lady next to him in the aisle, and she said, "I am so impressed with you, sir. Your patience with little Georgie. Not many men could do what you're doing, the way you're so patient, soothing him. I'm so impressed with what I see in you, sir." And he said, "Ma'am, I appreciate it. I don't mean to pop your bubble, but I'm Georgie." "It's okay, Georgie. It's good. It's going to be all right. It's okay, Will. It's okay." So the first poem I'd like to read, as I said, is a Valentine's poem that I wrote for my precious #1 fan over there, Leslyn. When I met her, she was Leslie, but there was a particular person that we met that would call her Leslyn, and she really connected with that. She evolved from Leslie to Leslyn.
Because that's my real name.
That's the real name.
But I never liked it because it was so unusual.
Too unusual. Now she doesn't mind being unusual. So, I love you from my heart of mine. With all my strength and might of mine. I love you for your soul of thine, for all your love and light of thine, which after all is not even thine, but divine. That's it. This kind of leads into it. The first, I'm reading selections from a work called Science of the Heart, which is my latest collection of devotional thoughts and poems. It's called Science of the Heart, and I brought along copies for those who'd like and would be glad to sign any, if you'd like that. So this first selection that I wanted to read from Science of the Heart. Joy is a seed planted deep. Fleeting pleasure can be found in a pill on a countertop or in a liquid in a glass. But lasting joy is a seed planted deep in the soil of the soul. Joy runs too deep to be captured by a pill or in a glass. Someone said they almost wished that Thomas Jefferson had not used the phrase, the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and all these God-given rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They didn't say, I wish he hadn't said it at all, but sometimes I have doubts about it, he said, because happiness isn't attained by pursuit. Happiness is a byproduct of something else, doing something else. When happiness isn't in your mind necessarily. Happiness is like a butterfly that lands unexpectedly, surprisingly on our shoulder. Or it's like a sunbeam that you try to capture in a jar. It might be in there for a few seconds, a few minutes, but it's not going to stay there. Happiness is elusive when you pursue it. But when you forget about it and think about others, for instance, oftentimes it's a byproduct. It comes into the picture. It sort of sneaks up on us, This one is called The Worst Dictator. The most harsh and oppressive dictators in all human history. They weren't Stalin or Hitler or Mao or anyone else we might suspect. The worst dictators of all are mood and circumstance. When we allow our moods and our circumstances to dictate to us our sense of personal well-being, if that is dependent upon our circumstances and the mood we happen to be in, we've been truly brought under the heel of the most ruthless dictators in history. A ripple can become a wave that in turn becomes a flood. As repeating thoughts can alter, and science has shown it to be true, repeating thoughts can alter the very structure and chemistry of our brain. So too, habitual, positive, affirming thoughts and words can alter the shape of our minds. And I spell alter A-L-T-A-R. Can alter the shape of our minds. I like to leave it free too for if somebody feels to interject something, don't hesitate. Don't be like Hezzy. Don't hesitate. I'm open to any feedback. There was once a man so lonely that the only calls he ever got were accidental calls, sometimes called butt calls. People that dialed him by mistake. But he was grateful and welcomed even those calls because they interrupted the miserable monotony of his daily life. He considered suicide, but didn't really think he could go through with it. Still, he knew that many like him often did go through with it. May we interrupt the misery of many like him this year, either accidentally or on purpose. Boredom has been defined as an overaccumulation of unprocessed experience. Boredom, it's not because not enough is happening, but more is happening than we have been willing to evaluate, than we've been willing to examine. So boredom is more realistically, more truly, more accurately defined as an overaccumulation of unexamined experience. As we really examine the things that we experience each day, we get more interested in our own lives. Guilt got a bad rap. Guilt has been given a bad rap by certain practitioners in our contemporary society, as if it was always unhealthy. Come on, give it a break. Truth be told, there would be no personal growth or positive change in our lives without a good sense of guilt. Yes, there is bad guilt, and such a thing as guilt tripping and guilt mongering each other, but there is also such a thing as good guilt. Good guilt is a healthy regret for having missed it or messed up in some way or in many ways, with a view to how we can avoid that going forward. There's still time to turn around, but there will not always be time. There is coming a time when things will be set in their places. There was a scenario that C.S. Lewis wrote about. Welcome. C.S. Lewis, some of you may be familiar with him. And it was, I think, in his science fiction work called Out of a Silent Planet. And there was an alien laboratory where aliens were examining a human being. And in that human being, this is the part that C.S. Lewis said was, they're talking to each other, and their supervisor comes in and says, well, what are you learning from this human being that you're examining? What are you learning about these earthlings? And he said, the first one, well, we're learning that they're so impressed with numbers. They're so impressed with numbers and size that true greatness often passes them by unnoticed. They don't even notice it when true greatness is in their presence, because they're so oriented to size and numbers. And then another one said, I can predict every problem on the earth by just looking at this one person, by just searching through their thoughts and their tendencies. I can predict every problem that exists, even wars that exist on the earth. And there's always wars at any given time. Just by looking at this one person, the seed of it all, of all the troubles, it's in every one of them, and it's in this one. Just because you are not sure what you meant by what you said, that doesn't make it meaningless. It doesn't make it unimportant. It may be, in fact, one of those intuitive meanings that gathers more sense over time and gathers more clarity over time. So it may be you should write it down. Even if you don't understand it, it may come in handy down the road. Jerry West, the great basketball player and promoter from West Virginia, before he passed away, which he did recently, he said this about himself: I am an enigma even to myself. I've been told I'm an enigma by others, but I have to admit I'm an enigma to myself, even to myself. I don't get me a lot of the times. The present is a present. The present moment is your latest gift received. That may be why it's called the present. You think of the power of a life lived fully present to each moment. That must be the abundant life, to be fully present in each moment and what it holds. Kind of goes back to examining our experience. Don't leave too much experience unexamined. Surely that is abundant life.
I'm enjoying this very much, but I would like some background about maybe you and your life and how you came to writing this book.
Okay, yeah, I could have provided that.
And I know you did.
I'm an enigma, even to myself. Yeah, what's that, hon?
You do that after you finish.
Well, yeah, I don't mind saying a little bit now that. So I'm a chaplain. I started out as a hospital chaplain, got into military chaplaincy work. I'm a seminary graduate, but I've always liked creative writing. I've always, even since I was small, I remember listening to the rain on an awning, on the top of a metal awning, and being fascinated by that, and writing a poem about the rat-tat-tat of the rain on the top of the awning. And I remember writing in high school. I was in the creative writing class, and I wrote a poem about Kennedy's assassination, John F. Kennedy's assassination. And to my surprise, the teacher of that class, her name was Mrs. Gray, she put that poem on the front of the school newspaper, just inside the cover of the school newspaper after that assassination, and in this calligraphic letters. She surprised me by putting that poem about Kennedy being shot, and something like he is lost. Spokesmen have quit speaking and started babbling, not knowing how to interpret what has happened. Spokesmen quit speaking and began to babble. He is lost. That was a part of the poem. But anyway, so yeah, this interest in writing. My first book is up here. It's called On the Other Side of Orphan. This was the first book that I ever had published, and I called it The Other Side of Orphan because there's a word in English for orphan, a child without parents, but there's no English word, as there is in some languages, there is no English word for a parent without a child that's been deprived of a child somehow. So The Other Side of Orphan, that was my very first effort. And I also wrote one called Busboy at the Banquet of Life. I was telling Brenda about it last night. Busboy at the Banquet of Life. And I actually read from that one at Glen Eyre over in Cary, which is one of your sister communities. And at that particular reading, it was in the evening after dinner. For dinner, I had a busboy smock on, and I was going around to the tables, pouring coffee and clearing dishes. I was the busboy at the Banquet of Life, so I was priming them for the reading that was going to come, and that went over quite well. But there's a story of Philip Yancey. Have anybody read the author Philip Yancey? He went to, or maybe I should ask, has anybody ever been to Old Faithful, the geyser? Yes. Well, he was there, and when it came time, all the tourists rushed to the window to see the geyser blow. And as he was going to the window, he's a very observant fellow. As he was going toward the window, he looked back over his shoulder and he saw the wait staff just swept in. The wait staff getting dirty dishes and repouring water and coffee and stuff. They just swept in like a flock of birds. They swooped in to get all the tables that were vacated by the tourists going to watch old geyser blow. But as Philip looked over his shoulder, he noticed that none of them was even remotely interested in the geyser, the wonder that was happening. They had lost the sense of wonder about that, and it's understandable because they were seeing it every day. So it's understandable how that could happen. But he used that as a metaphor about how we can also lose our sense of wonder. We can lose our sense of wonder at what is around us and in us and in others. We will either be conformed to the world or transformed by the renewing of our minds. We will either be conformed or transformed, but one way or the other, we will be formed. For it's impossible in this life not to be formed. To be transformed then and become an enigma to the darkened world whose sun has been snuffed out like a candle. Become an enigma to those who cannot comprehend your joy or your cheer. What do you have to be so cheerful about in the face of what they think is a grim situation? Become an enigma even to yourself, as we referenced with Jerry West. This one's called equip. To equip in the sense of to mend or repair is also a backward-looking verb, repairing and undoing damage that's been done previously in order to move forward more effectively. Just as true education is largely about unlearning, not so much about learning new things, but unlearning things that we wrongly learned in the first place in order to provide for a fresh beginning, in order to clear the space. Stimulating the imagination is a key ingredient to true education. And when imagination has been abdicated and we let the media do our imagining for us and not use our own, that's a sign of decadence in a society when our own imagination is not functioning, but we've abdicated that and let it be done for us by the media, by the culture, by movies and entertainment. Not that all that is bad, but it's easy to let our own imaginations atrophy, kind of like a muscle getting flabby. So real education is more like gardening than manufacturing. Real education is more cultivating qualities in people and in ourselves, like you would cultivate a garden. It's not so much developing a product like a manufacturer would do. So true education is more like gardening than it is manufacturing. And that was a quote from a president of Hillsdale College. Okay, this is one called masculine feminine. In the rampant confusion in our present day culture in America regarding gender and sexuality, a vital truth has been overlooked and forgotten. It is the fact that it is normal for a biological boy or a young man, for example, to show certain recessive feminine traits. And the other way around also. It is normal for a biological girl or young woman to show certain recessive masculine characteristics. And some will show more of these than others, in a more pronounced way. And some will show, this holds true whether it's a physical trait or a psychological trait. It certainly doesn't mean that boy or girl or young woman or young man is in the wrong body and needs to have that gender altered, their born gender. A set of gender traits in a person is rarely ever exclusively male or female. The problem is due to the fact that in decades we've been taught to hide or to be ashamed of traits that were the opposite. That we shouldn't have, if I'm a boy or a man, I shouldn't have feminine characteristics. I need to be macho. Or if you're a lady, you shouldn't have male characteristics. You should be more feminine. And but it's rarely ever that way. When we have traits of the other sex, the other gender, it actually enhances our personality. It makes us more complete. But it hasn't been seen that way. It's either been seen in the past as something to hide or in the present as something to panic over and think, I've got to get surgery. The happy and healthy medium is in neither of those extremes, but it's in a healthy acceptance of naturally occurring opposite sex traits as something that can enrich our identity and make it more complete and complex. Complexity was one of the elements of classical beauty, complexity, and even add to its mystery. The key is that identities and personalities are to be enhanced, not exchanged, because of the presence of opposite sex elements in a person. To live a life in violation of one's own conscience is an exhausting way to live because of the constant need for manufacturing self-justification. If we're violating our conscience, it's exhausting to have to come up with all these self-justifications. What the heart embraces, it's been said, the mind will find a way to justify. What the heart embraces, the mind will find a way to justify. And because heart and mind need to be in tandem, they need to be in harmony. So we try to keep that harmony, to keep that equilibrium by going through whatever gymnastics we have to with our mind to justify what our heart wants. There is a woman that, as a mother of a young toddler, went into a fire to save her child, in a house fire, and succeeded in rescuing the child. But in the process, her arms were burnt, her hands were burnt badly. And so going forward then, she had these scars, ugly scars on her hands and arms. And whenever she went out in public with the little girl that she had rescued, her daughter would say, "Mom, wear those long gloves that you have. Wear that long blouse, the long sleeve blouse that you have. Because people stare. They stare at us when we're in public. I feel self-conscious. So please cover those." And her mom complied. She did that. But then one time, her daughter just happened to think, "By the way, Mom, how did you get those scars? How did you get those scars on your hands and arms? Those terrible scars?" And she told her the truth. It was rescuing you. And she said, "Oh, Mom, don't ever hide them again. Those hands, those arms are beautiful, Mom. Don't do it. Forgive me. Don't ever hide them again." It reminded me of the story of another fire situation that wasn't a successful rescue, where a middle-aged man lived near his parents, and his elderly parents had a house fire. He went to hearing the alarm, hearing the fire truck. He raced over to their house because he was within walking distance of their house. He raced over to the house, and tried to rescue his parents, but he failed. He failed. He couldn't, it was too late by the time he got there. And he always blamed himself. But in the process, he burned his face badly. But he always blamed himself. If I'd just run faster, if I'd gotten there quicker, it's my fault that they're not alive now. And he was a married man, had a wife, beautiful wife. And after that incident, he began to withdraw from his wife. And she tried to get him interested in going to a plastic surgeon to have his face repaired because it was badly disfigured by the flames and that unsuccessful attempt to rescue his parents. So now he had this terrible disfigurement in his face. But for him, that was fine. He felt like I deserved that. I deserve that. That's something I can carry, a way that I can pay for the fact. This is what he's thinking unconsciously. I can pay in that way for my failure to rescue them. But his wife missed him, of course, missed their fellowship, went to the surgeon who had offered to repair his face. And she said, he refused your offer, but get this, will you disfigure my face so I can go? Maybe he will accept me. Maybe if my face is disfigured like his, maybe he'll let me back into his world. And he said, ma'am, I can't do that. That's against our professional ethic. We can't do that. But I will go and talk with him again. And so he went, and he said, in the process of that conversation, he said, do you know that your wife came to me your beautiful wife, and was willing to have her own face disfigured just to get back into your world with you because she feels so shut out. And when he heard that, he said, wow, I didn't know she loved me that much. I'll go through with it. I'll go through with the surgery. So he did. And I don't know what, I'm sure it was an improvement over what it was. And I'm sure that relationship, just by that conversation, began to live again, began to be a husband-wife relationship again. The master teacher and the students, not only was the master teacher good for his students, but the students were also good for the teacher. For they would ask questions like, what do you mean by that? They were compelling him to clarify his point, develop his thought a little further. They were, in a certain sense, holding his feet to the fire, lest he be guilty of speaking empty words. Sometimes the master teacher might think to himself or to herself, I'm not entirely sure of what I mean by that, by what I just said, but I know it's important, it's worth saying. Let's pursue the full meaning of it together. Let's find the fullness of that meaning. Thank you for asking that question. The concert that hurt the most, arthritis had crippled the fingers of an accomplished violinist in his later years. He could barely play the instrument anymore without intense pain, but he kept the pain private. No one else knew. Yet still his final concert seemed to be, to his avid listeners, the most beautiful of all the concerts. And most memorable. It got rave reviews. He wondered how it could be. It didn't make sense to his natural mind. The very notes that caused him the most excruciating pain to play seemed to be the same notes that brought the most exquisite joy and pleasure to his audience. They were totally unaware of his suffering behind the notes. Their joy seemed to be deepened by his increasing secret agony as the concert proceeded and progressed to its climax. The mystery of the memory of that night nourished the artist, the violinist, for the rest of his life, for the remainder of his life. It was said of Paganini that he could play 12 notes at once. What do you think about that? 12 notes. 12 notes at once. It was said about John Coltrane from Hamlet. Somebody here is from Hamlet. I met her yesterday. That he could play 5 notes at once on the, or sought to do that on his saxophone. But anyway, Paganini was about to give a great concert, and his violin was in a case backstage. When it came time for him to come on stage, he went back to get his violin, and he noticed this isn't the same case. This doesn't look like there was a violin in a case there, but it wasn't. It was a cheap substitute for his exquisite violin that he used in his concerts and practiced with. And so he just picked it up and said, what's going on? And they looked around, and he asked the stagehands. They looked around. We can't find the other one. Somebody must have stolen. Somebody must have come back here. I'm sorry, Mr. Paganini. Somebody came back here and stole your violin. And he said, well, if this is what I got, this is what I got. So he goes out on the stage, and he proceeds to play one of the most beautiful concerts that he'd ever played. But before he played, he held up the violin and he said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to prove to you tonight, the music is not in this instrument. The music is in the soul of the person playing it and the person's listening to it. It's not about this instrument. And I'll prove that to you. And he did. He played seemingly even more beautiful on an instrument that was far inferior to the one that had been stolen. The music is not in the instrument. It's in the soul of the one playing, and the one listening. I daydreamed another version of hell. Don't know if there's anything to it. It flickered away as quickly as it appeared. It wasn't an ugly, desolate place, after all, this hell. But it was a breathtakingly beautiful place instead. Yet it was an achingly painful beauty because there was no one near to share it with. No one with whom to share all that beauty. You were alone with it, and there never would be anyone to share it with. That's called fatally beautiful. Speaking of beauty, it's called retreating beauty. Of course, our beauty has not forsaken us. It's only retreated elusively inward. You're still beautiful. Your beauty has retreated inward elusively. And the ones who chase after it relentlessly, they are the ones who will mean the most in our lives. They will be the most meaningful to us because they've chased in after that beauty. For good or for ill, we're often unaware until later who it is that has influenced and impacted us the most in our lives. They say, and I'm not sure how you can arrive at this, but it's sort of spread around like it's scientific, that we only know 10 to 15% of the people that we've deeply impacted in our lives in a good way. That we only know about 10 to 15% of that. And some have suggested that the reason we don't know more is because if we did, we'd be proud about it. We'd get a big inflated head about these people that we were influencing in a positive way. So mostly we don't know. We're allowed to know just enough to keep us encouraged, but not so much that we would become proud and arrogant about it. The butterfly, cocooned in the white bands of his burial cloth, the monarch of monarchs, emerged through a pinhole in all the glory of his kingly and monarchical majesty. So the butterfly, cocooned in the white bands of his burial cloth, the monarch of monarchs, the king of kings, emerged through that pinhole into all the glory of his kingly and monarchical majesty. If and where you can help it, don't let your thinking become overthinking. Don't let your organism become over-organized. Don't let your movement become a monument. Don't let your seminary become a cemetery. Don't let your museum become a mausoleum. And by all means, never let your Acropolis become a necropolis. Necropolis. I don't know if you ever heard of that one. But a necropolis is I'm just finishing up now. A necropolis is a big mausoleum, a big burial container. This is called Bach meets Brubeck meets Bocce. What if one of the great classical composers of the 1700s had heard modern jazz in his sleep while dreaming? What would he have thought, or she? How would they have responded? This may be, in fact, what happened. He would have, or she would have, no cultural frame of reference for what they were hearing. Can composers prophesy with musical notes? In one of Bach's Brandenburg concertos, there's a hint of modern bluegrass music. If you listen closely, it's like Bach prophesied through that little succession of notes, this form of music that was going to emerge hundreds of years after him. For John the Revelator to have heard and seen what he saw in the book of Revelation would have been a little like an 18th century classical composer hearing jazz or hearing heavy metal music. Our son likes heavy metal. We like classical, he likes heavy metal. It would have been a little bit like that, and trying to make sense of it, without a frame of reference. Or would it have been like Paul hearing words in the third heaven, it was unlawful or impossible to pronounce? Yet these men saw these visions and heard these words and songs from the future. We might need to be prepared for exposure one day to the same kinds of visions and words and songs that might not make sense at first. And this last one, a somewhat suspicious question. I was asked smugly, sarcastically, even cynically and suspiciously in a dream when someone came to me and said, "What have you been doing? Nothing?" I replied, "Yes, variations of that." Okay, and then the science of the heart. There is one science that cannot be learned by the mind alone, but it requires the heart, and the whole heart at that. Brenda, you mentioned the doxology last night, and I thought I was going to comment to you that recently, when you think about the words of the doxology, praise God from whom all blessings flow, praise him all creatures here below, praise him above ye heavenly hosts, praise him Father, Son, Holy Ghost. But what I'm beginning to understand is that we humans can't give praise to God that's worthy by ourselves. We need the help of the squirrels, the trees, the mountains, the rivers. We need the help of all creation, all the creatures of creation. We need to imagine, as we praise God, all creation joining in, everything that has breath, everything joining in with us, and the angels. So we can't give one man or woman by herself or himself, just standing alone, can't give praise that's worthy, but can give praise that's worthy when we realize that it isn't coming up solo, it's part of all creation praising, all the heavenly hosts and angels praising at the same time, but we have to hear that by faith. We have to see that by faith. So it isn't just me playing this flute but there's a lot of other elements joining in that I learned to listen. I'm trying to learn to listen by faith to what the other instruments are bringing. Here's the one I wanted to play for you. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, so there are some books available if anybody would like. They're welcome to them. I would be glad to sign if you want me to do that. And thank you for being here. Thank you for your kind attention. And Are there any comments that anybody would like to make as we finish it up here?
Just thank you for coming and sharing.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
yeah, your insights and your talent is fun. Makes me think a little bit deeper than I normally would have on a Wednesday morning.
Good, that's,
So thank you.
you're welcome.
After my own heart.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Safe trip back. So you're leaving this afternoon? Yeah. Have a safe trip on the way back.